Last week, I watched a live stream of the European Parliament. The room was filled with that specific brand of sterile, high-stakes energy you only find in Brussels' expensive suits, the soft rustle of heavy bond paper, and a palpable sense of historical triumph. They were passing the Military Schengen Resolution. To hear the speakers tell it, they had just dissolved the borders of the continent, creating a seamless defense highway from Lisbon to Helsinki. One official even called it the end of the administrative roadblock. He looked genuinely proud, like a man who had just solved a centuries-old puzzle with a single stroke of a pen. But then I came across a different kind of document, a technical report from the German Ministry of Transport. It wasn't written in the flowery language of European unity, but in the cold, hard numbers of structural engineering. It pointed to a specific, unremarkable bridge over a secondary highway, the kind of place you drive over without a second thought. According to the report, if a single Leopard 2A7 tank, the pride of European armor, were to attempt a crossing, the bridge wouldn't just groan, it would likely undergo catastrophic structural failure. It's a bizarre contrast, isn't it? On one hand, you have a room full of powerful people convinced they've unlocked the continent's mobility. On the other, you have a 70-ton beast of war sitting idle because the very concrete beneath it is rotting. It's as if the civilization has forgotten that you can't drive a tank across a legal paragraph. This instantaneous disconnect between the triumph on paper and the decay of the physical world really makes you wonder, is this a strategic plan, or is it a symptom of what Spengler called a civilization in winter, where the rituals of bureaucracy continue even as the infrastructure of reality collapses? While Europe celebrates its paper victory across the world, another civilization is busy pouring more concrete in a decade than the West has in a century. It raises a haunting question. What happens to a superpower when it can no longer move its own weight?
That's the ultimate question, isn't it? It's the test of state capacity in its most raw form.
Exactly. And that contrast you just mentioned between the administrative dream and the physical nightmare, that's really the core of what we need to unpack today.
It is. We're going to dive into how Western powers, got into this position, this paradox of having immense administrative power on paper, but a kind of paralysis when it comes to the physical world.
Okay, so let's start with that project, the Military Schengen, because it just perfectly captures this whole thing. The administrative illusion versus the physical reality.
Right. So the Military Mobility Project, it's a huge deal for the European Union's defense goals. It falls under something called PESCO.
PESCO, that's the Permanent Structured Cooperation in Defense.
That's the one. And the idea behind it is strategically very sound. It has two main goals, really. The first is all about administration, getting rid of the red tape. The second is physical, actually improving the infrastructure.
The administrative side I get, it's like the regular Schengen zone for tourists, but for tanks. You want to be able to cross borders without a mountain of paperwork.
Exactly. And you have to understand why that friction is there to begin with. It's not just one rule, it's decades of different national regulations all piled on top of each other.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, the source material gives a perfect example. Imagine you're moving U.S. troops and, say, a column of heavy equipment from their base in Poland into Germany.
Okay.
Even in peacetime, with no crisis at all, that move requires 5 days advance notice.
5 days just for the paperwork.
But for the paperwork and authorizations to cross one border.
In any kind of modern conflict, 5 days it's an eternity. The battle could be over by then.
You'd lose any tactical advantage you had, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the goal is to get rid of that, to have standardized procedures, to remove the need for passport checks for soldiers, to slash those advance notice times. It's about making sure your sources can be where they need to be, when they need to be there.
Whether it's an EU mission or a NATO one.
Doesn't matter. The idea is to create one seamless operational space. And that right there is the paper triumph they were celebrating in Brussels.
It sounds smart. It sounds necessary. But then, like you said, you slam right into that second goal, the physical world.
Yes. The administrative agreement is completely 100% dependent on the physical reality of the roads, the rails, and especially the bridges.
And the plan does include fixing them, right? It's not like they've ignored it completely.
Oh, it's in there. The plan calls for improving infrastructure, for widening tunnels so a tank transporter can fit, making sure airfields can handle heavy cargo planes, and the most critical part, strengthening bridges.
Which brings us back to our Leopard 2A7 tank. How much does one of those weigh again?
It clocks in around 70 metric tons.
Yeah.
It's an incredible piece of machinery, but it puts a huge concentrated load on any surface it crosses.
And the surfaces it needs to cross, they're not ready for it.
Not even close. in many cases. And this is where the history comes in. The vast majority of this critical infrastructure, we're talking bridges, overpasses, highways, was built during the post-war economic boom.
So the 50s, 60s, 70s?
Right. And the design load standards from that era.
Yeah.
They're just tragically out of date. They weren't thinking about a 70-ton monster. They're thinking about the trucks and tanks of their time.
It's a strange kind of decay. It's not from a natural disaster. It's failure by progress. Our technology outpaced our concrete.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's an insidious decay because you don't see it until it's too late. And those German federal reports you mentioned in the intro, they are brutally clear about this.
What were the numbers again?
The report suggests that around 13% of Germany's federal highway bridges are structurally inadequate for these modern military loads. 13%.
And that's not just Germany. France is reporting similar issues.
Yes, it's a continent-wide problem.
Yeah.
So to be very specific, if a German-made Leopard tank tries to cross one of those 13% of bridges, what's the engineering forecast?
It's not just that it might damage the bridge.
No. The term the source uses is catastrophic structural failure.
Which means the whole thing comes down.
The whole thing collapses. You don't just lose a bridge, which is a critical piece of infrastructure. You lose a multi-million-dollar tank and potentially its crew.
So you have this grand political agreement passed with all this fanfare that says move freely. But the actual physical network that you need to move on is basically a minefield of weak points.
The mobility isn't determined by the legal paragraph. It's determined by the load-bearing capacity of a 60-year-old concrete span over some forgotten river. It is, in the truest sense, a paper tiger.
Okay, so the paper gives you permission to move, but the failing bridge tells you it's impossible.
It dictates the possibility, yes. And this really gets to a core idea, that the physical strength of a state comes down to these mundane civil engineering standards, not just its political ambitions.
Which begs the obvious question. If the problem is so clear, if we know 13% of bridges are basically no-go zones, why on earth haven't they fixed them? Why hasn't the physical repair kept up with the paperwork?
Well, that's because the very way we govern ourselves in the West has evolved to prevent that kind of action. This leads us straight into the idea of the Vetocracy roadblock.
Vetocracy, that's a term from Francis Fukuyama, right?
Yes, and it's the perfect word for this kind of political decay. He describes a system where you have so many checks and balances, originally designed for good reasons to stop tyranny, that they've grown into a cancer.
To the point where any small group can just say no.
Any small, localized interest group can effectively veto something that's needed for the greater public good or even for national security. The right to say no has completely overwhelmed the ability to do anything.
And there's a story in the source material that just illustrates this perfectly. This local administrator, Elias.
Oh, the story of Elias is just a perfect, heartbreaking microcosm of the entire problem. His frustration is so palpable.
What was his specific task?
He was a local administrator in a border town, and his job was to implement one tiny piece of the Military Schengen Initiative. He had to reinforce one specific stretch of road and one bridge to meet the new load standards.
And he had the money, right? The funding was there.
He had everything. He had the funding approved from the EU level. He had the national budget. He had the strategic mandate from on high. And yet, for 3 years, he accomplished absolutely nothing.
He just got stuck in the maze.
Completely trapped in a bureaucratic labyrinth. And it wasn't one big enemy he was fighting. That would be easier. It was 1,000 tiny cuts.
So what happened first?
First, the Cross-Border Environmental Committee had to sign off. That meant commissioning extensive multi-season environmental impact studies.
Multi-season?
Yes, you have to study the area in the spring, the summer, the winter to see the full impact. While that was happening, an environmental group filed an injunction.
For what reason?
They were concerned about protecting a specific, regionally protected species of beetle that happened to nest near the proposed construction zone.
So the entire defense posture of the continent is held up by a beetle.
The irony is just, it's overwhelming. But that's the power of the veto. And let's say he eventually got past the beetle hurdle.
It was next.
The local town council. They raised concerns about noise pollution from the heavy construction equipment. They demanded new, highly restrictive work schedules, which of course drives up costs and extends the timeline.
And then even individuals can get involved.
Yes. The final roadblock was an individual landowner. Their property was along the proposed detour route for traffic, and they were able to start endless legal proceedings based on their right of judicial review. Every time they did, it sent the agency right back to the drawing board.
That's the paralysis mechanism right there. The beetle lobby at the local council worried about noise. A single landowner. Each one has a legal weapon they can use to stop a strategic project in its tracks.
It's a decentralized and often subsidized power to halt progress. The result is that government agencies are incentivized to do nothing or to move at a snail's pace because the risk of a lawsuit or an objection is just too high.
Efficiency becomes the liability.
Speed is treated like treason. The procedure, the process itself becomes more important than the outcome. Elias, the administrator, he'd look at maps of, say, East Asian high-speed rail networks that seemed to appear overnight, and he just felt this sense of vertigo.
He's living in a world where his signature is a weapon to start things, while in another world, it's a command to build.
We've built these incredible administrative walls around ourselves, all to protect the right to object. And in the meantime, the actual physical foundation of our world, the concrete and steel, is just rotting away.
And this systemic friction, it's not some abstract concept. It has a real, massive, quantifiable economic cost.
An enormous cost, which is the perfect transition to our next segment, looking at the actual economic and political mechanics of this decay.
Right. It's time to put a price tag on this paralysis, because this isn't a soft cost. It shows up on the bill for every single thing we try to build.
The numbers, when you actually look at them, are just staggering. The comparative analysis of what it costs to build infrastructure in the West versus elsewhere, it's shocking.
Let's focus on the U.S. for a second, because the data is really clear there.
Okay, so research shows that the United States spends, on average, 3 times as much per mile on transportation infrastructure as its peer nations.
And when you say peer nations, you mean other high-wage developed countries.
Exactly. We're talking Germany, Canada, Japan, Sweden, countries with high labor costs and strong safety regulations. Even compared to them, the U.S. spends 3 times more.
That's not a small difference. That's a systemic failure.
It is. And some examples are even worse. The go-to example, the poster child for this dysfunction, is building subway tunnels.
I've seen some of these numbers. They're hard to believe.
Reports show that to build a single mile of subway tunnel in New York City can cost as much as $3.9 billion.
Billion. With a B. For 1 mile.
$3.9 billion. And for comparison, in places like Switzerland or Sweden or in major Asian cities, the cost is often just a fraction of that. This huge extra cost, this premium we pay, that is the tax of Vetocracy.
And the sources break down why this happens. It's not just one thing, right? It's a combination of factors.
It's a confluence of 4 major systemic problems. The first one is what we touched on before, decaying state capacity. It's about who is actually managing these projects.
So the government agencies themselves are the problem.
They're hollowed out. The state departments of transportation, the DOTs, are often severely understaffed. They lack the deep in-house engineering expertise you need for these massive, complex projects.
And so they have to outsource everything.
They're forced to rely on external consulting firms for everything from planning to oversight.
And what does the data say about that reliance on consultants?
It's a direct correlation. The more a state relies on consultants, the higher the cost. On average, it's linked to a 20% higher cost per lane mile of highway.
20%. And what about states that keep the expertise in-house?
The reverse is true. States that have higher DOT employment, more internal capacity, report costs up to 16% lower. When you outsource your brain, you end up paying a massive premium for it.
So you lose institutional memory, you lose competence, and you pay more. That then gets compounded by the second factor you mentioned, a lack of competition.
That's right. If the state agency managing the contract is weak and doesn't do a good job of getting companies to bid, the market gets lazy. It becomes an oligopoly.
Fewer construction firms are even bothering to bid on these big projects.
Exactly. And the economic effect of that is incredibly clear.
How much of a difference does just one more bidder make?
It's amazing. Statistically, just getting one additional company to bid on a project reduces the final cost by 8.3%.
Wow. So a big chunk of this high cost is just non-competitive pricing because the state isn't strong enough to foster a competitive market.
It's a vicious cycle. The state gets weaker, so the market gets less competitive, which drives up prices, which gives the state less money to build capacity.
The third factor is a bit more personal, more human, planning failures.
Yes. This is about competence at the very beginning of a project. Poor initial planning is the seed that grows into massive cost overruns later on.
Because of change orders, right?
Precisely. These are the unexpected changes, the fixes for things you overlooked, the scope alterations that happen mid-project. That's where the budget really gets destroyed.
And this comes down to the skill of the individual engineer in charge.
It does. It shows that even with all these big systemic issues, human competence still matters immensely. The studies show that if you replace a consistently high-cost project engineer with just a median average cost 1, you could cut project costs by over 5%.
So the hollowing out of state capacity also means you're losing the talented people who know how to prevent these expensive mistakes in the first place.
The talent pool dries up, and the mistakes become baked into the budget.
Which brings us back full circle to the fourth driver, the root cause of vetocracy, legal and regulatory friction.
This is death by 1,000 cuts. It's all the transaction costs baked into our legal system. Take the concept of over-engineering.
What do you mean by that?
We often see things like subway stations being built unnecessarily deep and massive. It's not because the engineering requires it, it's for political reasons.
Like what?
Like minimizing the disruption on the surface for a powerful local neighborhood group. So to avoid closing a street for 6 months, you spend an extra $1 billion to tunnel deeper.
So the engineering choices are driven by local politics, not by efficiency or logic.
Exactly.
Yep.
And then you add the legal machinery on top of that. The environmental impact studies, the EIS, which we talked about with Elias, they're almost designed to invite litigation.
By requiring those multi-season studies.
It gives any group months or even years to find a reason to file a lawsuit, which grinds everything to a halt and adds immense legal costs.
You're describing a system that seems almost perfectly designed to be inefficient. It guarantees delays and cost inflation.
The project manager ends up spending more time with lawyers and community groups than with engineers and construction crews.
Which leads to this really dark pathology at the heart of it all. You call it the survival of the unfittest.
It's not just that the system is incompetent. It's that it actively rewards dishonesty. It's based on intentional strategic misrepresentation.
Wait, you're saying the planners are knowingly lying about the costs and benefits of a project?
The data is undeniable. The source material shows a pattern that has persisted for over 70 years of public project forecasting. Costs are always systematically underestimated, and benefits are always systematically overestimated.
But why? If everyone knows the forecasts are wrong, why do the funding bodies keep approving them? That sounds like incompetence on their part.
It's worse. It's a rational political choice. If you're a politician or an agency trying to get a big project funded, you know that a realistic, honest, high-cost estimate will probably get rejected.
So you lie to get the money.
You use the magic formula. Underestimated costs plus overestimated benefits equals funding.
So the project that looks the most attractive on paper is actually the one that's based on the biggest lies.
It's an inverted Darwinism. The most financially sound projects, the ones with realistic appraisals, die in committee. The ones that get the green light are the ones that were most dishonestly presented.
And they are therefore the ones guaranteed to have the biggest cost overruns and benefit shortfalls in the real world.
Exactly. The system is designed to select for future financial disasters. It ensures the survival of the unfittest projects.
Is there a classic example of this? A project that just embodies this failure?
The Channel Tunnel is the global poster child for this kind of strategic misrepresentation.
The Channel. It was hailed as a modern marvel.
And it was, from an engineering perspective. But financially, it was a catastrophe. The final construction costs were 80% over budget in real terms.
80%.
And the financing costs, the cost of the borrowing, went 140% over the forecast. At the same time, the revenues, the number of people and goods using it, were less than half of what was promised.
It was just a financial black hole from day one.
Post-project evaluations basically confirm that, from a purely economic standpoint, Britain would have been better off if the tunnel had never been built at all.
Wow. And this isn't a one-off thing?
Not at all. We see the pattern everywhere. The Danish Great Belt Rail Tunnel had 120% cost overrun. It only became financially viable because they were allowed to cross-subsidize it with toll revenues from a completely unrelated highway bridge nearby.
So if the system incentivizes lying, how do you ever fix it? How do you get reality back into the process?
There's a methodological solution. It's a brilliant idea that came out of Nobel Prize-winning work on cognitive bias. It's called reference class forecasting.
Or taking the outside view.
Exactly. I find this concept so powerful because it forces planners to stop believing their own optimistic stories.
Explain how it works. How does it get around that political pressure to lowball the numbers?
Okay, so traditional forecasting uses what's called the inside view. You focus only on your specific project. your unique team, your unique challenges, your internal plans for success.
It's very narrative-driven. Our team is special. We can beat the odds.
Precisely. And because we're human, that view is almost guaranteed to be overly optimistic. It's the marathon runner who was never trained, but is sure he'll win because he feels good today.
So what's the outside view?
The outside view completely ignores all that. It ignores your team's story. Instead, it asks a simple question. How did other similar projects actually turn out in the real world?
So you build a database.
You build a statistical distribution of outcomes from a large comparable reference class of completed projects. Hundreds of other tunnels or bridges or rail lines.
So instead of asking how special your New York tunnel project is, you say, historically, 90% of urban tunneling projects like this have gone at least 40% over budget.
And you are therefore required to add that 40% uplift to your budget from day one. You force historical reality onto the financial plan.
So that extra money isn't just a contingency fund. It's a scientifically calculated buffer against systemic, predictable failure.
It's an optimism bias uplift, as the UK Treasury politely calls it. It's an intellectual solution designed to fight a political problem. It injects accountability back into the numbers.
Okay, let's pivot from that. We've talked about the rotting bridge and the broken system in the West. What's the counter model? What does functioning state capacity look like?
Well, this is where we have to look at the East Asian logistics miracles. The contrast is, it's profound. It shows how differently national will can be expressed when that administrative friction is gone.
You mentioned a logistics officer, Sarah, who was working on the military Schengen planning.
Yes, her perspective is so telling. She's sitting there looking at these digital maps of Europe, trying to coordinate these complex movements between, half a dozen countries.
And she realizes it's all built on sand.
She realized that Europe's abstract agreements, as she called them, were a fantasy. A paper tiger that couldn't hold the weight of one tank. Her frustration was that while she was stuck in committees, other nations were just building.
At a speed and scale that is hard for us to even comprehend.
The scale is the key word. When you look at China, the raw numbers of their state capacity are just on another level.
That's a high-speed rail figure.
Since 2008, China has built over 45,000 kilometers of high-speed rail.
45,000 kilometers in about 15 years.
That level of infrastructure creation in that short a time is, frankly, unprecedented in human history. And it's achieved through a completely different political model, centralized execution.
The phrase that uses one blueprint drawn to the end.
It's the polar opposite of our vetocracy. It minimizes the checks and balances that allow for endless objections and delays. The priority is execution.
It's what allows them to get past the beetle.
Exactly. The will of the central state overrides the local objection. And it's not just that they're building fast, they're building to a higher standard.
How so?
Most of the new infrastructure being built across East Asia bridges, highways, rail beds uses a much higher load standard, often capable of bearing over 150 tons.
So more than double what a Leopard tank weighs. Why is that a strategic choice?
It means their civilian infrastructure is inherently dual use from the very beginning. It's a ready-made military mobilization network. When your standard highway bridge can handle 150 tons, your military planners don't have to worry if their 70-ton tank can cross it.
The infrastructure is designed to support state power. It's not an afterthought.
Right. So for that logistics officer, Sarah, Europe's paper agreements are a joke, while the East's high-speed rail network is a single pulsing artery of real physical state power.
And this focus on the physical capacity to mobilize. There's a fascinating historical parallel here. Even in a system that had its own massive internal problems.
We have to look at Soviet logistics during the Second World War.
This was all about the railway gauges, wasn't it?
It was a logistical nightmare of the Eastern Front. Soviet railways used a wider gauge track than the European standard. So as the Red Army pushed west into Poland and Germany, they had to physically convert every mile of track.
A massive undertaking. The Germans had the same problem in reverse when they invaded Russia.
And it crippled their supply lines. But the Soviet effort to convert the tracks back was just this incredible display of raw will. It was chaotic, it was brutal, it was done under fire.
I remember the source mentioning how they did the work, hammering screws in.
Just hammering them in because it was faster than turning them. It created low quality, often dangerous track, but the principle was absolute movement at any cost.
But it wasn't a perfect, well-oiled machine. There was internal friction there too.
Oh, immense friction. The central government, the GKO, was constantly changing its mind because of fights between different parts of the bureaucracy.
Like what?
The Soviet Railway Commissariat, the NKPS, was fiercely protective of its own locomotives and equipment. They didn't want to lose them to the newly converted Polish railways, so they were constantly fighting to halt the conversion process.
So even in a totalitarian state, you have these institutional silos fighting for their own interests.
It was a messy human struggle. But here is the crucial difference from the West today.
What's that?
The state's ultimate capacity and its willingness to force physical execution. When the big Vistula Oder offensive was launched, the political leadership just cut through all the infighting.
They just overrode the railway commissariat.
They did. Despite an earlier decision to stop the work, they just ordered them to start converting the lines all over again. The physical need of the army overrode the bureaucratic policy debate.
The will to shape the material world won out.
It did. They overcame their own internal friction and the immense physical challenges to get it done. That ultimate capacity to do is the core difference.
It's a powerful point. The ability to project power is, at its heart, a logistics problem. And logistics is about physical reality, not legislative elegance.
And this brings us to the deeper, more philosophical dimension of all this.
Yeah.
To what you mentioned in the intro, the Faustian winter, and Oswald Spengler's view of how civilizations fall.
Right. We're moving from the technical decay of a bridge to the existential decay of the civilization that can no longer fix it.
Spengler's work it's a very pessimistic framework, but it's also a compelling one for understanding this disconnect we're seeing.
He didn't see history as a straight line of progress. He saw it as cycles.
Like organisms. Cultures are born, they grow, they mature, and they die. He said they move through distinct phases. The first, youthful phase, is culture.
And what defines that stage?
Culture is the creative, spring-like phase. It's full of spiritual energy, artistic creation, a sense of becoming. He specifically called Western culture the Faustian culture.
My Faustian.
Because of its unique obsession with infinity. The drive to reach for the horizon. You see it in the Gothic cathedrals soaring to the heavens, in the age of exploration, in the relentless pursuit of scientific knowledge. It's a boundless yearning.
But then inevitably, that creative culture stage ends. It hardens into what he called civilization.
That is the winter, the thing become. It's no longer about dynamic creation. It's about static expansion and management. It's cold, rational, and traditionless. The intellect takes over because the soul of the culture is exhausted.
And his primary example was the Greeks and Romans.
The perfect example. Greek culture was philosophy, art, tragedy, intensely creative. That culture then transitioned into the Roman civilization, which was all about practical things. Law, administration, road building, empire management.
The Romans were brilliant engineers, but it was utilitarian.
It was about maintenance and control, not that Faustian striving for the infinite. And if we apply that lens to our own time, to the Faustian winter, you can see the parallels in our economy and society.
The shift towards financialization, for example.
Yeah, the source material really highlights this pathology. The West has entered a stage where our energy is consumed by friction. Legal friction, bureaucratic friction, managerial friction. We're not focused on building things anymore.
We're losing the ability to turn an idea like military Schengen into a physical reality, like a stronger bridge.
It reminds me of that story of the aging structural engineer you found, Marek.
Right. He was a living witness to this decline.
In his youth, he was part of that great post-war boom, actually building the industrial arteries of Europe. And now what does he do? He just goes around putting up signs with lower weight limits on the bridges he once built. He's managing the decay.
He felt that society had traded the welder's torch for the accountant's spreadsheet.
And that's the heart of it. A financialized economy that values the abstract manipulation of capital over the tangible production of goods will always struggle to compete with a model focused on physical output.
The money and the talent flow into managing the friction, not overcoming it.
Exactly. The resources are consumed by lawyers for compliance, by consultants for those endless reports, by huge administrative teams. We get 10 new review committees instead of one new bridge.
That's a perfect definition of a financial parasitic project. It grows the bureaucracy without producing any actual usable capability.
And Spengler predicted that this stage, the dominance of money, would eventually lead to a profound political transformation.
What did he think would happen to democracy?
He argued that in this late civilization stage, democracy becomes the political weapon of money, of capitalism. The mass media, which he called the electrical news service, serves this power structure.
And ideals like freedom and equality are just used as tools.
They're used by the urban intellectual class as weapons in a class war against the old rooted traditions of the culture phase. It's a negative freedom from the past.
And he believed this dictature of money was inherently unstable, that it would collapse.
Yes. He said it would fall before the rise of a new overpowering figure, the Caesar.
And Caesar isn't one specific person, but an archetype.
An archetype of pure, centralized, pragmatic power. The Caesar isn't about restoring the old traditions. He's about imposing a hard, practical order to simply manage the vast, static body of the late civilization. Spengler thought we were entering the age of Caesarism right now.
And this leads to his final, very difficult concept, the struggle of blood versus money.
Right. And it's crucial to understand what he meant. He believed that abstract money and capitalism are too weak to hold a society together in the end. The only force strong enough to overthrow it is what he called blood.
But he didn't mean it in a purely ethnic or racial sense.
No, it was more metaphysical.
Yeah.
He meant a unified, rooted collective will, a race feeling that expresses itself as a powerful political and economic order that's focused on tangible, physical power and production.
So the collapse of our administrative, money-driven system gives way to a centralized will that is obsessed with the ability to build and to move.
That is the prophecy. The Caesar breaks the power of money and its political tool, democracy. And after that, the age of big ideas and grand politics is over. High history, he wrote, lays itself down weary to sleep. What's left is just a long, quiet age of management.
So when we pull all of this together, the failing bridges, the crippling costs, the speed of construction elsewhere, it all points in the same direction.
It does. The contrast is stark. The Vetocracy in the West makes it physically impossible to mobilize our own heavy armor, which makes a mockery of an agreement like Military Schengen.
And the Spenglerian lens helps explain why. It shows why our financialized economies are struggling to match the physical, logistical miracles of a different developmental model. We shifted from creation to administration.
Ultimately, what this all shows is that the real expression of national will today is physical engineering. It's high-speed rail and robust bridges, not abstract legal agreements. The ability to build is the real measure of power.
It's easy to sit in a grand hall in Brussels and celebrate a paper triumph. But as that logistics officer, Sarah, realized, while Europe writes resolutions, the East pours foundations. If you can no longer translate your will into physical reality, you're losing the game.
That's it. The global power shift we're seeing isn't really ideological. It's a pragmatic reflection of physical efficacy. The side with the tangible power to move heavy equipment across its own functioning infrastructure will prevail over the side with the illusion of administrative agreements.
The final measure of a civilization is what it can physically build and mobilize, a capacity currently being challenged by bureaucratic rituals and the loss of the will to shape the material world. The truth of the rotting bridge is absolute.